Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
We are on our literature unit, day 3, guys. And as you all know, day 3 usually focused on the themes and the ideas that are featured in a novel or whatever piece of literature we're focused on. Usually we tend to stick with novels. This is a fictional story. It's not true, or it's not even a historical novel. It's set in the future, although it's really not science fiction per se. Per se means exactly, because it really doesn't have a lot of new technology, and all of the human behavior that's found in the book has been seen in the past, according to our author, Margaret Atwood.
She's got examples. This is a story about Gilead, which is a theocratic totalitarian country, and there certainly have been those in human history, and also there have been countries or civilizations that have oppressed women as well, so she's got some examples there. So she's trying to make it as realistic as possible. It has happened in the past, and it could happen in the future, so she has created this future totalitarian state that oppresses women, and it's all about what Offred, the main character, she narrates it, and she becomes involved with the commander and the chauffeur, and there's all sorts of kind of soap opera themes to this book, and you might enjoy it, but it's also kind of guessing at what might happen in the future, but she doesn't like it being classified as science fiction. She likes it being social science fiction.
Yeah. Okay, as we always do, we're going to read through today's lesson, and then we'll be back to break it down and talk about some of these terms. The most telling theme of The Handmaid's Tale is the control of reproduction as a means of gaining political power. The men of Gilead spin a pro-Christian rhetoric, using distorted biblical principles to justify their belief that women are merely a mechanism for repopulating society. In doing so, they eliminate women's rights to employment, property, and sometimes their names. By stripping the women of any perceivable identity that they previously had, the men even deprive them of their voice. This power over language is evidenced through the forbidden acts of education, reading, and writing, which are viewed as tools of influence that women might use to rebel against the regime. Furthermore, when the commander secretly visits Offred, he's using his access to language and its illicit nature as a way to seduce her. The ability to communicate is a powerful weapon to wield over someone lacking the freedom of expression. By lording it over Offred, the commander fulfills his desire to have her without the ceremonial pomp. Though the theme of subjugation is undeniable, the feminist ideology present in the novel is more complex than it first seems. The novel is seen by many as a feminine dystopia, which depicts a system that gives men greater rights than all of womankind. However, the citizens of Gilead actually form a pyramid-shaped hierarchy, where the upper classes of each gender sit at the apex, with the men outranking the women at each level. Offred, who's useful as long as her womb is fertile, sits low on the pyramid. Serena, though stripped of her rights, still enjoys a relatively comfortable position in society. While unmarried men have more rights afforded to them, they're nevertheless seen as an inferior class. This surprising dichotomy allows for the recognition that Gilead is not just about the repression of women, but the overall control of humankind.
Okay, we're going to talk about some of the themes or ideas in The Handmaid's Tale. And the most telling theme of The Handmaid's Tale is the control of reproduction as a means of gaining political power. So this is the most telling, I guess the most significant, the most obvious theme of this book. It's all about the control of reproduction. Remember, they're trying to get Offred pregnant. I guess the commander can't do it, so they try to get the chauffeur to do it. And if the chauffeur can't do it, they'll probably try to find the gardener or whoever else to get that woman pregnant so they can control the population. So reproduction basically is all about childbirth, okay? Basically reproducing human beings, having babies, and repopulating society.
Reproduction also refers to animals having babies too. It's not just humans, but yeah, and this is their means in that particular society, this Republic of Gilead, of gaining political power. Now, the men of Gilead spin a pro-Christian rhetoric. Spin is a word you often hear when you're listening to news about politics, because everyone in politics spins a message, which means they take whatever fact they can find or whatever poll or news comes out, and then they talk about it in a way that is favorable towards them and their party. So they're spinning or they're changing pro-Christian idea to fit their world, I guess, of what you'd want. Pro-Christian means positive towards the Christian religion. Rhetoric is something I actually studied in college. If you're a communications major, you have to take a class of rhetoric. It's the art of persuasively speaking, selling your point. Usually it's in writing, but it can be in speaking as well. And you use lots of different techniques to persuade the audience that what you're saying is correct, that what you're saying is true, even though it might not be sincere. So they're spinning these ideas they find in the Bible to use them in a way that they'd like to. They distort biblical principles to justify their belief, hey, that women are merely here to repopulate society. If you distort something, you change it so that it's no longer what it was meant to mean. What is distorted? Sometimes for example, I'll give you an example of my makeup. When I take my eye makeup off at night, my mascara, I use oil, and it distorts my vision after that. It's blurry. I can't really see clearly. So if you distort something, you change it so it's not in its original form.
Yeah, especially when people tell you stories about a conflict they had with another person. Of course, they're going to distort things to make them look like the victim, and the other person is the bad person. The other person is wrong. So everybody does this.
Distorts the truth.
They put their spin on their own versions of the story. They are biased. They distort things. Or if you've ever seen political cartoons, they always distort the features of the person they are depicting. Like Barack Obama always had these really big ears. Or George Bush always had these really sinister-looking eyebrows and things like that. They always try to distort those things. These are principles that are from the Bible, which is the holy book of Judaism and Christianity. They try to distort those principles to justify their belief. If you justify something, you say that what you believe in is true because you have certain kinds of proofs. And the Bible is full of all sorts of information, and there are passages in there which would suggest that women should be suppressed and they should just simply obey their husbands and stuff like that. Those passages are in there. It depends on your interpretation. So there's passages in there to justify slavery as well. People use those passages in the southern United States to justify slavery at that time. So yes, they put their spin on it. And again, they're trying to legitimize their position that women are just a mechanism for repopulating society. A mechanism is just something that accomplishes some kind of goal.
Yeah, it could be a tool, right? Tool for using, but here it's more figurative. We're not actually a tool, but it's a way for something to happen to repopulate society. Now, in doing so, they eliminate or get rid of women's rights to things like employment, having a job. If you're employed, it means you're working for someone, or you could be working for yourself too. That's a good thing as well. Property, you have no right to own anything. You can't buy a house, you can't buy land, you can't own anything. Usually the things you own, it doesn't have to be land. My property also includes things inside my apartment too. But typically if you see property these days, it's about land and real estate, buildings on that land. Sometimes you can't even have a name. They eliminate names. I know back in Chinese history, females didn't have names. They were actually just called Furen. It would be their husband's surname, his last name, and then Furen. I was like, wow, that's tough. No name.
Yeah, and even nowadays when women take their husband's name or they try to take their maiden name, but that's their father's family name and stuff. So, yeah, it's really hard to actually ascertain what women should be called. And in any case, by stripping the women of any perceivable identity that they previously had, the men even deprive them of their voice. So they are stripped of their identity. To strip usually means to take off your clothes rather quickly, but it can mean the quick and violent removal of something. To strip someone of their rights, for example. They don't have the right to vote, for example. Hey, those people have been oppressed. They've been stripped of their right to vote. And here they're stripping the women of any perceivable identity. Perceivable means something that you can see. And they may have had this in the past. They no longer have it anymore. So therefore, they have been deprived of their voice. So this is a verb phrase here, to deprive someone of something. That means you simply don't give them that thing. You deny them that thing. In some societies, people are deprived of the right to free speech.
Well, when I was really naughty growing up, sometimes my free time would be taken away by my mom. I was deprived of my free time, my playtime, because I wasn't obeying and doing my chores.
How awful.
I know. Right now, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back.
大家好，欢迎收听 English Digest， 我是 Sunny。今天我们要看的是 Unit 15文学单元的第3天课程。前2天我们看了《使女的故事》，它的内容大意以及作者介绍。今天我们的重点放在这本小说的 theme 主题。文章一开始就说，这个小说最重大的主题是什么呢？就是 The control of reproduction as a means of gaining political power. 控制生育作为获得政治权利的一种手段。我们看到这里的 a means of， 要注意 means 这个字是单复数同形，所以不管是一个还是好几个都是用 means， 意思是手段、方法。例如 driverless cars may become a popular means of transportation in the future. 在未来，自动驾驶可能会成为一种受欢迎的交通方式。另外，我们常见到这个字有一个搭配的片语 by means of， 意思就是借着什么方法。例如 We crossed over onto Hong Kong Island by means of the ferry. 我们借着搭渡轮横渡到香港。接着文章说到，激烈国扭曲圣经教义来合理化他们的信念。他们认为女性唯一的用途就是制造新人口，所以他们剥夺了女性很多权利，像是工作权、财产权，甚至有些人连名字都没有。我们来看课文第一段的中间，他说 They eliminate women's rights to employment. 我们知道 rights 在这里的意思是权利，那拥有什么东西的权利就是接介系词 to, the right to something. 如果你要表示有权利做什么，就可以说 the right to do something. 例如 People convicted of a serious crime usually lose the right to vote. 被判了犯重罪的人通常失去投票的权利。
We're going to take a short break. We'll take that break and then we'll be back.
Let's continue with our lesson. We're going to continue talking about how women are oppressed in The Handmaid's Tale. We talked about their names being stripped, so of course they don't have any identity, and they have been deprived of their voice. And this power over language is evidenced or shown or proved through the forbidden acts of education, reading, and writing, which are viewed as tools of influence that women might use to rebel against the regime. This this makes sense, of course, when a country or a government tries to oppress people. They don't let them go to school, they don't let them read, and they don't let them write because they'll get too smart that way. These are tools of influence, things that they could use to actually rebel against the regime. Rebel here is a verb that just means to try to overthrow or take over or oppose a government.
And a regime is a government, but it's usually a type of government that holds all the control over the citizens. You must do what they say, or they'll send the military after you. So regimes are not a good thing. Furthermore, when the commander, remember, he's the upper class fellow who has all the power. When he secretly visits Offred, he's using his access to language and its illicit nature. Illicit, again, means forbidden nature as a way to seduce her. She doesn't have access to books and reading or even simple games like Scrabble. And so she's fascinated with this, and it's a way he seduces her. If you seduce someone, you persuade them to have sex with you.
That's right, and he's using language as a way to seduce her. The ability to communicate is a powerful weapon to wield over someone lacking the freedom of expression. Okay, so again, there are probably some historical examples of this. If you're good at language, you can easily control other people. I guess Hitler was a master of that, as was Stalin and other people. Like they were really good speakers, and they could basically persuade people very well. Wield here just means to use some kind of weapon as a way to intimidate people.
Oh, yeah. So this was a way to control people. Now, the next sentence is by lording it over Offred. If you lord something over somebody, it means you're using your power to brag. Nowadays, it means kind of to brag about it, to let people know how important you are. My brother would sometimes get more candy than I would, and he'd lord it over me, bragging about how much better his life was than mine because he had more candy.
Ooh. More cavities probably too.
Maybe, but I don't know. Anyway, he lorded it over her, kind of showing her what she couldn't have. And it made her really, jealous and want what he had. He's able to do this and fulfill his desire to have her without the ceremonial pomp. That's kind of a fun phrase there. Ceremonial means something that happens in kind of a very formal way, as in a ceremony, which is usually very formal. Pomp just means it's usually a public event. Well, they'll have a lot of pomp, which means a lot of flashy music, costumes. It's a very, very splendid display that you often see. It usually shows somebody has a lot of power and money.
Kind of reminds me of a formal dinner. Sometimes it's so ceremonial that you can't really enjoy the meal.
Relax, yeah.
You can't relax and be yourself. So after the ceremony is over, you go down to the night market and you chow down.
You got it.
Maybe that's what's happening here. The ceremony is just too formal.
A little too formal.
He wants it to be a little bit more casual, a little bit more intimate. If things are too ceremonial, they're kind of impersonal. And let's move on now to the next paragraph. Okay. It says, though the theme of subjugation is undeniable, the feminist ideology present in the novel is more complex than it first seems. Okay, subjugation. That's when you subdue someone, you subject them to your power and your authority, you control them, basically. This theme is undeniable. You can't deny that this is going on. It's definitely there. But then you might be thinking, okay, feminism. Okay, let's fight for women's rights. But it's not that simple. The themes of feminism and control and stuff like that are more complicated or more complex than that.
The novel seen by many as a feminine dystopia. Dystopia is a word that means an imaginary place, something that people have made up. It's a state in where everything is really awful, bad, unpleasant. It's typically a society that has a regime in charge or totalitarian control. control. So it's a place that not much freedom exists. So this is the feminine or the female version of the dystopia. It depicts or shows a system that gives men greater rights than all of womankind. Usually we see mankind, humankind. Well, here's the feminist version of that word. It's womankind. But all the men in this novel, whether they're servants like Nick, who's a chauffeur, or the commander, who's upper class, they all have better rights, more rights than the women who are in this book.
That's right. So that's the depiction here. It's what it's trying to show, all about men having greater rights than all of women, not just a couple, but all of women. They totally control them. However, the citizens of Gilead actually form a pyramid-shaped hierarchy where the upper classes of each gender sit at the apex, with the men outranking the women at each level. So, yeah, we don't have all the women at the very bottom. They occupy different parts of this pyramid-shaped hierarchy. A hierarchy is just a level of importance in society. Who controls who's at the top, who's in the middle, who's at the bottom. You'll probably have some kind of hierarchy in your company. Who supervises who. A hierarchy in the military, of course, who can give who orders and stuff like that. But you've got the genders in all levels of this. In fact, members of each gender sit at the apex, which is the top, but still the men in that level control the women there.
Yeah, the top is just the highest part of something, like a mountain, the point. And the men outrank the women at each level. If you outrank somebody, you have a higher status than they do. That happens in the world, you know, as you get more experience and you do better, you get promoted, you outrank people below you. Now, Offred, who's useful as long as her womb is fertile, she sits low on the pyramid. She's nowhere near that apex or the top. Your womb, of course, only women have wombs. Womb is part of your body. That's where the fetus or your baby develops when you're pregnant. And if you're fertile and you're talking about women, it means you're capable of producing babies. Tom used a word earlier in the program, I think it was perhaps in the last program, where he said that Serena, the wife, might be sterile. If you're sterile, it's the opposite of fertile. It means you can't have babies.
Exactly. So, yes, Serena, while you mentioned her, she has been stripped of her rights, but she still is in a very comfortable position in that pyramid in society. But again, she's still controlled there. And while unmarried men have more rights afforded to them, they're nevertheless seen as an inferior class. So, yes, unmarried men have more rights than, say, unmarried women, for example, but still they are considered inferior. And that, I think, was true in the past. If you weren't married, if you were a man who wasn't married, people suspected you as being irresponsible or something like that. Nowadays, that's not so true. You can stay single as long as you want to, both men and women. And again, that's a surprising dichotomy. Dichotomy, ooh, that's a fun word here.
Yeah.
That just means you've got two things and you kind of contrast them at the same time. The dichotomy between public safety and freedom of speech. People should be allowed to speak, say what they want, but then you've got to worry about public safety. If they say something that's a little bit too much, then we have a dichotomy here, two things existing at the same time.
And this surprising dichotomy allows for the recognition that Gilead is not just about the repression of women, but the overall control of humankind. Actually, the book talks about how the men are controlled as well, at least those that are on the bottom of the pyramid, on the lower levels. Recognition just means you identify something, you know what it is. And so when you read this book, you realize you can recognize the fact that, oh, they're not just repressing women in this book, they're actually controlling all of humankind. Okay, guys, it's time for our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back to say goodbye.
接下来我们看到文章的第二段，在小说里，女性是被禁止阅读和书写的，但是为什么大主教要把 Offred 偷偷找来，并且教他读书写字呢？第二段的最后一句就提出了解答，借着对 Offred 逞威风，大主教可以满足在仪式之外还能拥有他的欲望。我们来看一下这里的片语 Lord it over。 通常 Lord 这个字我们都是拿来当作名词，但这里它是动词。这个片语的意思是指某人对待别人的方式 就好像他觉得自己比别人更厉害、更重要，也就是逞威风或是摆架子。例如 Jason's promotion went to his head and he started lording it over his co-workers. 杰森的升迁冲昏了他的头，他开始对同事逞威风。在讨论完激烈国如何透过控制声誉和语言来掌控大权之后，作者在第3段提出了另外一个观点。文章说到，激烈国的百姓形成了一个金字塔型的阶级制度，而男性和女性的上流阶级都位居顶端。然后课文说 With the men outranking women at each level. 男性在每个阶级里的地位又都高于女性。我们来看一下这个句型 with 加受词再加受词补语。通常这个介系词片语是用来补充说明主要子句，而受词补语如果是动词的话，就要根据文意中的主被动来决定是要用 VING 还是 VPP。 例如课文里的受词是 the man， 受词补语是动词 outrank， 因为是男性的阶级高于女性，所以我们用主动的 outranking。 所以呢，作者所提出的论点就是这部小说所涵盖的性别阶级不单只是男性高于女性这么单纯，即使在同样的性别当中也存在着某些人的地位比其他人高。例如大主教的妻子 Serena, though stripped of her rights, still enjoys a relatively comfortable position in society. 尽管她的权利受到剥夺，她仍在社会中享有相对舒适的位置。我们来看一下这个句子哦，看得出它是一个分词构句吗？原本的句子是 Though she is stripped of her rights, Serena... 因为 though 引导的副词子句里面的主词也是 Serena， 所以我们可以省略主词和 be 动词，只留下 stripped of。 不过要注意的是，当副词子句简化成分词构句的时候，为了要避免句子的意思不清楚，所以通常会保留副词子句里面的连接词。例如课文里就保留了 though， 表示尽管。接下来我们看到男性之间也存在着阶级差异，像是未婚男性就被视为次等的阶级。文章这边说 While unmarried men have more rights afforded to them。 通常我们看到 afford 这个字，第一个想到的意思是付得起、买得起什么东西，但是很显然的用在课文里就不对了。这里的 afford 是另外一个意思，表示提供、给予，意思就类似 provide。 不过这是属于比较书面且正式的用法，我们只要知道有这个用法就好了，不需要刻意去背。今天的课程讲解就到这里，谢谢大家收听。
That is it for today's program. Thank you for joining us. And if you choose to read Margaret Atwood's novel, The Handmaid's Tale, we certainly wish you the best of luck with it. It's well written, but it would be quite a challenge for you if you try to read it. We're confident that you'll be able to get something out of it. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.